Now, the important focus for tonight is the regulation in the context of this. So think about copyright as a solution to a particular kind of externality. The externality, positive externality, that artists and authors and sculptors and creators in general produce. There are some, increasingly today, among our youth, who believe that this type of regulation, copyright, is no longer needed. Just last night, someone tweeted this. I don't agree with Lessig's support of copyright, though. I think the creaky old ship should sink, not worth saving, and start again. These people represent what I want to call abolitionists in the copyright space. They believe we should eliminate this regulation of copyright and live life without it. My own view is anti-abolitionist. I believe copyright is essential. It's essential to avoid an unavoidable problem here, this problem of externalities. In my view, without copyright, which is a kind of restriction on speech, we would have less speech. Paradoxically, we limit the freedom of some people to copy other people's works to create the incentive for people to produce more great work, more free speech. Now, the point isn't that we have to do this for all kinds of creativity. People find sufficient incentive to tell jokes to their friends without copyright intervening. But we do need it for some kinds of creativity. Some books, some movies, some art. Actually, none of this art is protected by copyright, but ignore that for a second. Some art requires copyright. Copyright's essential if that art is to be created. But the critical point to recognize is that as with privacy, the right regulation of copyright is going to depend upon the technology. And that technology will change. And as the architecture of that technology changes, the right regulation is going to change. What made sense in one period is going to make no sense in another. And we've got to adjust the architecture of regulation to make sure that we achieve the same value of copyright protection in a different context. So with copyright, what would the right regulation look like? Well, first I think we need to distinguish between the amateur and the professional. My view, like Sousa's view, is that we need a copyright system that encourages both. It needs to produce incentives for the professional and freedom for the amateur. So how can this be done? Well, I think we can see something of how it can be done by watching, actually, the evolution of creativity in the context of digital technologies on the internet. And I want to describe this in 3 stages. The first stage, circa 2000, defined by professional or commercial entities that are deploying technologies that are extending the kind of read-only culture that we inherited from the 20th century. Massively efficient technologies enabling people to get and consume culture that was created elsewhere. This is the poster child of that vision of culture. Apple and its iTunes music store allows you for 99 cents or the equivalent around the world to download any song that you want to your iPod, of course, only to your iPod, but you're guaranteed, at least in America, if you practice this form of cultural consumption, to be cool. This is the vision, as my colleague Paul Goldstein described it, of the celestial jukebox. Perpetual access to whatever content you want at a relatively low price, able to buy it and consume it whenever you want. It is critically important, this kind of culture, for a rich culture. Rich not just in the sense of money, but rich in the sense of diversity. This kind of celestial jukebox gives us a richer culture than we have without it, because we have access to an enormous range of culture to consume and to learn something from. But the second stage of this development, I think beginning around 2004, is very substantially different. This is encouraged by the amateur or non-commercial parts of the internet, really encouraging a revival of the read-write culture that Sousa was speaking of. The poster child for this is Wikipedia, but the particular version I want to focus on here tonight is something we could call remix. So I'm going to give you some examples so we all understand precisely what I mean by remix. We can think first in the context of music. 2004, this story was hatched. You all know this album by the Beatles called the White Album, which inspired this album by Jay-Z called the Black Album, which then inspired this album by DJ Dangerous called the Gray Album, which literally synthesizes the tracks of the White Album and Black Album together to produce something gray. So this is 2004, 2 tracks put together. The equivalent today is something like Girl Talk. Girl Talk can mix 230 tracks together in one particular song performance. Remixing to produce something new. Or think in the context of film. 2004, this film Tarnation made its debut at Cannes, said by the BBC to wow Cannes. This is a film made for $218. Kid took video that he had shot through his whole life and using an iMac given to him by a friend. He was able to remix it to a level to wow Cannes and win the 2004 Los Angeles International Film Festival. Or think about AMVs. Of course, everybody here knows about anime, which are increasingly sweeping American culture. AMVs are made when people take the anime cartoons and re-edit them to set them to a different music track or tell a different story. So something as trivial as this. Or something like this. Or think in the context of politics. Here's some clips from the latest cycle.
Good evening. The first, the second, third, and last presidential debate. I'm sure but now we've heard all the talking points. So let's try to tell the people tonight some things that they haven't heard.
Thank you, Bob. Tom, thank you. Thank you very much, Jim.
Well, thank you, John. Thanks to University.
I think everybody understands. I think everybody knows now we are in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. 8 years of failed economic policies promoted by President Bush and supported by Senator McCain. McCain mentioned looking at our records.
And so let's look at our records.
An across-the-board spending freeze is a action, and we do need to scale.
Senator Joe Lieberman and I.
We're currently spending $10 billion a month in Iraq.
I don't know, many of you saw this, I'm sure. This now becomes a natural way to express political ideas. Music connected to these words.
It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. It was sung. It was sung by everyone. As struck out as the shore of pioneers, swept westward, unforgiving.
And then this next one is my favorite still after 5 years of shame.